everybody, members and officers, and welcome to the first meeting of the Overview Committee. Just start with agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Kerry, who's in other council business. Councillor Rowan is substituting, and also from Councillor Zadrozny, who's given other reasons, and Councillor Hollis is substituting for him.
Can I just give apologies for Jim Creamer, who's on his way back from another meeting, and we hope he'll be here soon.
Okay, have that recorded. Well, welcome everyone, and see how it goes. Okay, so, agenda item 2, declarations of interest by members and officers. So that's disclosable. Disclosable pecuniary interests or private interests, pecuniary and non-pecuniary. Any? No. Agenda item 3 is the terms of reference and membership, and this is for noting, but I will ask if there's any questions or remarks on the terms of reference. Councillor Hollis.
Yeah, just a few points really from the Independent Alliance Group with regards to the call-in procedures of some of the processes. You'll be aware, obviously, members were circulated with the full new constitution based on the strong leader model. And we just had maybe a few points to raise, which I know a number have been taken on board by Marge already and yourself. Firstly, with regards to the limitation on the number of call-ins, I understand it's 3 in a 4-month period.
4 months, yep.
I don't want this council to be seen in any way, shape or form, you know, to be stifling transparency, and we want to make sure that everything's in the spirit of the scrutiny process. And to be putting limits on it, I was just a little bit concerned. But something I was hoping to suggest was that we could maybe look at changing that to 3 for the opposition. So at least, for whatever intents and purposes, the opposition have a chance to call in 3 decisions in that 4-month period, which doesn't sound a lot in itself, but I understand why you're trying to put a limit on it so we can make sure we do things thoroughly and properly. But I know most councils don't have a limit at all, and it's I was hoping to understand the reasoning for the limit in the first place, but at the very least have a slight change to say that for the opposition. And then the other slight concern I had with in relation to it was I think the phrase was, Marge will correct me on this, vexatious call-in. It was, so if a member wants to call in, I think it's 6 members, the monitoring officer can disallow it if it's considered to be vexatious. I'd say to you, Mr. Chairman, that your version of vexatious might be different to what I'd understand it to be. It's quite a, you know, it could be different things to different people. And I'm just trying to understand the purposes of having, if 6 members of the county council believe it to be relevant enough to call in, and we've got the 3 limitation on it already, is it really necessary to have it as vexatious at all? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think if 6 members have called it in, that's probably good enough reason for it to be spoken about at this committee or the relevant scrutiny committee. But I think they were just a couple of points.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand over to Councillor Owen and then to the monitoring officer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's appropriate that I come back on those items. The working group considered the whole issue of the Governance and Ethics Working Group, which was a cross-party working group. There were representatives of the Labour group, Councillor Pringle was there, representative of the Independent Alliance, Councillor Helen Ann Smith, myself and the then Vice Chairman, Councillor Moxon, and the business manager, Councillor Barnfather, and also Councillor Garner. So the whole gamut of representation on the County Council was represented in that working group. And we considered the whole issue of call-in. And it was agreed unanimously that the way in which it is now operating would be the way that we would do it. And I think there's a misunderstanding on the part of Councillor Hollis as to the purpose of the call-in procedure. The call-in procedure is only ever intended if the process by which a decision has been reached is flawed. And I emphasize the word process. It doesn't mean to say that you disagree with the decision. It's the way in which that decision has been reached is flawed. Now, I would not anticipate that there will be very many occasions with the guidance of officers, professional officers, with the experience that they've got behind them, that we would be making decisions based on a flawed process. And so to avoid any attempts to try and keep putting in requests for call-in, which were inappropriate, we decided unanimously across the whole of the council, endorsed in the meeting of the 31st of March, if you recall, Chairman, that we would go down that route. Now, as far as the issue of vexatious is concerned, it's not your decision, it's not any of the the select committee chairman's decisions as to whether a call-in is vexatious. It is the monitoring officer's decision, and the monitoring officer is apolitical. So she will make that decision. Now, whether or not we have to issue and draw up a protocol to assist her in that, I don't know. That may be something that we will want to look at as time goes on. But I think we've made some very sound decisions that have been endorsed by the full County Council unanimously on the 31st of March, and I can't really see why we're discussing them now.
Thank you, Councillor Owen. And yes, it was agreed unanimously. The working group was cross-party, Councillor Hollis. So Independent Alliance does make representation on all of the recommendations here in terms of reference. And this morning we had a very, very useful presentation from the LGA. And I'm sure you had the invite to that. That was in your diary. And that shows how we're going to reach these decisions, whether they're using pre-scrutiny or post-scrutiny, and doing all that together. So you would find that helpful. I'm going to hand over to the monitoring officer. Okay.
So just to build a little bit on the points that Councillor Owens made, this has been approved by full council now, and any other changes to the constitution would have to go back to full council. And as Councillor Owen has already referred to, it was unanimous at full council that we would agree the constitution has it set out, and we would operate that whilst keeping the working group ongoing and reviewing after 12 months. So that has been agreed. So we haven't got the authority here today to change the constitution. So that would be the first point I want to make. The second bit about the call-ins, the test, and what I would be doing as the monitoring officer would be determining whether a call-in request was valid. I'm not quite sure about where the term vexatious come from. Okay, so but is it valid call-in? So is it in compliance with the law? Is the decision that's been made that's being called attempted call-in compliance with the law? Is it proportional? The action must be proportionate to the desired outcome. Has consultation taken place? Does it have due regard for human rights? Comply with the public sector equality duty? Has it got the options that have been, does it give due consideration of the options? And is it in accordance with the council's budget and policy framework? So those would be some of the sort of things that I would be looking at in determining whether it was valid or not, if that helps provide some clarity.
Anyone else? No. Okay, that's just for noting. So noted, thank you. We'll go to agenda item 4, which is the work programme, which we are going to populate, come up with some ideas today, but I'm going to hand over to Adrian for a brief presentation. First, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, members, we'll walk you through just a few background and contextual slides, but in effect, the objective of this item is to open the floor to the Chairman for each of you to start to highlight areas of interest that can start to form part of the work programme for scrutiny. But I think it's important to start off with just a reminder, thank you, Sarah, that we've got a comprehensive structure here that has been put in place, and the Constitution sets out all our rules and regs, but you can see the structure there, overview, and your role here on the overview committee, sitting above our 3 select committees, formally within our governance structure. And a really key point that again was emphasised in the workshop this morning is that there's no scrutiny without cabinet, and there's no cabinet without scrutiny. The role that you'll play in this committee is fundamental in terms of ensuring good governance for the organisation. And of course, you'll have a relationship and dialogue with other parts of our governance system, including the health scrutiny. And of course, you can just about make out in the colour contrast there, the police and crime panel. There are some key differentiators for overview, not least that you'll provide that strategic overview. You'll have a very clear role within the budget process as well. And of course, you've got a role to play in approving and signing off the work programmes of the individual select committees. But of course, you're not decision makers. You're here as critical friend for the organisation. You're here to hold the administration to account. And as I said, you're a fundamental part of our governance system. Seeing that critical friend role as being forward-looking, it isn't about blame in that respect. It's about trying to find sets of recommendations, both pre and post decision, that can help improve the work that the County Council does, and indeed the partnership does for its residents. And therefore that might be in some respects examining the impact of services, the way that they're meeting residents' needs. It might be championing issues that residents or other voluntary other organisations have raised that are of particular concern. And of course, as we've already touched on today, there's a real opportunity for scrutiny to play pre-decision in the development of policy and service design or strategy, as well as just looking backwards after decisions have been made. Of course, key to achieving all of that, as we referenced earlier, is the quality of the relationships that you have between chair and vice chair, but also that you have with members of the cabinet. And key to that will be in agreeing your work programme. Of course, I think what we heard this morning was that kind of old adage of failing to plan is planning to fail. But of course, there's lots of moving components in the work planning for scrutiny, not just here at Overview, but across your 3 select committees too. So we're going to draw on that best practice that the Local Government Association shared with you this morning, and we're going to get into a process of identifying the key issues that members have at the forefront of their minds that you'd like to look at. We'll need to do that in each of the 4 committees, and then get into a process of refinement, prioritisation, and filtering to make sure that we get the right issue dealt with in the right part of our scrutiny framework. But of course, your work programme needs to be holistic. So I don't think you should expect to look at a topic and see it as one and done. I think we'll expect to work with all of the committees, not only follow through, but then do that kind of monitoring and review, test the impact or the added value that your scrutiny work has had. I'll come back to that first point around identifying the issues once we've had a chance for questions and answers on this part of the presentation. But we wanted to just dwell for a moment or two on the key principles which will help shape up your work programme. Now, we're a little small for some of you on the far side of the chamber, so let me try and bring some of them to life for a second. So firstly, the things that we would suggest you prioritise would be those that are most important to local residents, something that the committee can realistically expect to influence, i.e. it's something that's timely, for example. Critically, something that will have impact and add value. There's very little point in you having debates and spending time looking at issues and then shouting in the wind and not really being able to have any impact or add any value. And that therefore might be something that you identify through our vital signs or our performance reporting, and be an issue that's been flagged as amber or red, or something that one of our external regulators has pointed to us. It can be something that's very micro, but arguably you'll have most impact if it's a a macro issue that impacts on large parts of the county or large parts of our population, and certainly something that is in the County Council's best interests. We'd probably recommend that you don't pick up things that have only just recently been reviewed. Arguably, you'll have more impact if you look at topics that have been reviewed and then been in implementation for some time, so that you can not just be testing things in a slightly artificial state that have just been through a substantial change process. And I think critically, given the number of meetings that each committee will have and the amount of other competing priorities that you and the organisation has, let's try and avoid any duplication, which again is why the work programme is important. There is, and you would expect officers to say this, wouldn't you, but there is a capacity issue for us, as well as inevitably there will be for you, with the amount of time that we and you can commit to reviews or doing some of the interviews or sampling or analysis that we looked at this morning. So we'll have to have that discussion with you about capacity and resources, but fundamentally the best way to set up these programs based on the best practice is to be really clear about the outcome that you're trying to impact, and that should be writ large through all of the work that you do and ultimately the reports that you present. So the kind of process we're going to get into is set out in the workbook that we mentioned a number of times this morning, and that I know has been sent out to you in advance of today's meeting. I think what we, through the chair, are hoping to do today is to start that conversation, try and gather the top topics or issues that you think you'd like to be explored through the scrutiny process. And then just to give you a sense of how we'll move this forward, each of the select committees will be repeating that exercise within their own specific topics or areas of interest. We'll then need to do some shuttle running to work with chairs and vice chairs, just to make sure that we haven't got duplication and we've got the right issues being dealt with in the right place. No doubt there'll be a little bit of negotiation to take place between chairs, so that we populate the work programme over the coming year in a way that uses your time and resources to best effect, and to cover the issues that are most important to you. And our intention would be to get back in front of you in September with a fully populated work programme, and ideally even get into a place where you can have some scopes of work to discuss and approve and get underway in earnest in the September meetings. So if that's okay, I'm happy to pause and take questions, or through you, Chair, we can get underway.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian, for that. I hope everyone found that helpful. So there we go. Look, there's our timetable of forthcoming meetings all the way through to July next year. So I'm going to open it up for Councillor Hollis.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously the process is key. I'm not sure whether we, as the main overview scrutiny committee here, is going to then trickle things down to the other committees, and there's going to be a bit of back and forward like I'm used to at Ashfield. But certainly something I suppose we'd like to see, if we kick off with three suggestions. A review of the highways maintenance programme as the big one. I'd certainly like to see a recycling centre review. And then possibly, I know something that's key to a lot of our residents, doctor surgeries and healthcare provision. It might be a good review to have. And then a few minor suggestions that the committee may wish to take on is, cost of living and impact. The cost of living impact in Notts at the minute. We're running a similar thing at Ashfield at the minute, looking how it's affecting the public. And another probably big one would be a public transport review, and the effectiveness of buses. I know Nottingham City carried out a similar review recently to quite some good effect, and I don't know if we could piggyback on some of their ideas, but particularly parts of North Nottinghamshire, Councillor Moxon will be aware of this, like Mansfield and Ashfield. Some of the buses, particularly in the more outer bits of the towns, are terrible. And of course, they're the kind of people who want to be getting into our town centres as well. So they're just a bit of a starter for 10, really.
Thank you. Councillor Fold.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got one or two issues. I think these fall under, I've just scribbled it down quickly, these fall under, I think, mainly under the heading of championing issues of public concern, just so as you know, I'm keeping to the script. Okay. The first one is the Freeport, and I know this has been, we've had lots of briefings on this, but the governance is still to come up. It's something that's still concerning us. And I think there are two associated things around governance, and I think it's kind of related. One is, I know I've talked to, there's a lot, Adrian, about jobs, what really good local jobs. And I do understand that there are some Freeports where actually there have been some really good negotiations with trade unions that have enabled really good, real jobs, not just kind of, stacking shelves type jobs, and on the environment. So the impact on the environment too. The second one is around devolution, and in particular the local decision making. And one of the things that I think we've all agreed on now is we really do need some really serious, meaningful public consultation to raise awareness, because again, this issue is a public concern. When I go out and about and talk to people about devolution, there is still an awful lot of misconception about what it entails. And I think we need to address that as a council, make people understand what it's about, get their views, and actually then really explore properly some really good models of good local decision making that does include districts and boroughs, as well as kind of the broader public and perhaps voluntary and sector and other partners. So that one's okay. And I think one of the things I picked up from this morning was that the public shows there's been a service improvement. I think that's one thing that really we need to kind of, that needs to be linked into that, because if devolution is going to work, it needs to have some public benefit. I'd like to understand, and this is just, I'm going to throw this in because I'm not quite sure how to raise this one, but clearly we have the Nottinghamshire plan and the delivery plan. How are we going to scrutinise that? I assume that will come to this committee. Will it get divided up? I don't know. But clearly that's something that needs scrutinising, particularly around delivery. There is another one as well, but we've actually, I hope we've done the right thing. We've batted this to Adult Health and Social Care. I think the chair of Adult Social Care kindly emailed us around and said, have we got any ideas? And so we've emailed him this morning to say we think in particular of the impact of the social care reforms on this council, and both financially and in terms of the impact, the human cost in terms of our service users. That could do with some serious scrutiny too. I think that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fole. Councillor Sam Smith.
Thank you, Chair. No surprises that I'm going to talk about children and young people, if I may, and some priorities for the work programme when we get there. Firstly, we're quite an exciting time. There's loads of green papers, white papers, and rainbow papers coming through that we can look at as an authority, particularly around the academisation programme and social services as well, social care, and assess what changes government are expecting of local authorities, how that will impact Nottinghamshire, and what opportunities they bring to the council, such as the LA MAT and things like that. Also want to look around, we've had a huge increase in basic need funding for the county, so assessing where need is on pupil-placed planning and bringing together people like property and academies and the council to look at where we can spend that and build schools. Also EHCPs and ICDS application numbers, how long does it take the council to review those? Are we meeting the statutory times, both for new applications and annual reviews, and what other opportunities that can bring and changes we can bring? So they're my priorities for the Children Committee, which I'll bring up to them, but wanted to share them now.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Moxon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first of all, Councillor Hollis, I know we haven't had a chance to get together, so thank you for bringing your few priorities. I think one or two of those I'd got on mine as well, but apologies, it's sort of my fault really that we haven't had a chance to get together because I've been ill the last couple of weeks. But a few things that I'm hoping that we can concentrate on is about the main one being about the buildings that are owned and leased by Notts County Council. So not least sort of the building we're in now, Trent Bridge House, but there's many other buildings that we own or lease that we should make sure that we're getting value for money from. Councillor Smith's already mentioned about school buildings projects, and that's perhaps one of probably a few things that are going to go sort of cross committee. You know, does it come under children and young people's because it's schools? Does it come under the place scrutiny because it's to do with buildings that are owned and maintained by the council? Country parks, so have a review into the country parks that we own and maintain around the county. And then I think going back to what Councillor Hollis has said, sort of the highways review panel that was ongoing last year, I think that probably sort of needs some sort of continuation and see if that can be encompassed into the scrutiny, into the place scrutiny committee, and sort of continue that good work that was done in that cross-party consultation.
Thank
I think
you.
that about covers it for now.
Yep. That's a bit to be going on with, isn't it? Go back to Councillor Smith. Some of mine would be looking at your educational healthcare plans and your integrated care for disability services, and the transition of some of those children from children and young people services into adults. So I'd like to have a review of that whole and the transition process. Maybe have a deep dive into that one. You said looking at the property. Yeah, I'd like to look at some of our shareholder reporting and look at some of the businesses, the VIA, ARC, see how they report back to us. There's other issues. Obviously, the big issue that was brought up in my term as the chair of adult social care was the staff retention. So look at some of those pressures there in the adult services. That could be a bit of joined up between the children's services as well, because a lot of those staff are in both. So you said the review of the country parks, and that'd be a good one as well for our residents. Value for money there. So I think that's plenty, isn't it? There's a lot there. That's good. That's quite. Oh, Councillor Quigley.
Yes, don't leave me out, Chairman.
How could I?
I think Kate's already alluded to it, but one of the things that is sort of, I wouldn't say it's the top, but it's a very important issue on the agenda is the integrated care system and how it affects what happens in adult social care and public health. I mean, that's probably a piece of work we may need to work in conjunction with Health Scrutiny and Health and Wellbeing Board and a whole host of other people. And also I understand that there are particular issues with ICT and adult social care in the way that it works with frontline staff, and I think that's something that we need to take on board fairly quickly.
Thank you. An important one. Councillor Guilford.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, just one, and it was probably links into some what Councillor Hollis and others have been saying, but I think, and the impact that it will have on individuals, and I think it's a levelling up agenda, and just about where we are with that. And I know that there are a number of sort of bidding scenarios, and I think they're in the second stage now, but I believe there'll be a third in time. And you know, looking at where we are with that and what that means, because that can have a very serious implication for all the districts and all the people living in those districts. And I think because of the fact that it's sort of been very quickly placed upon us, probably a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to have a say about that. And I think we could all play a big role in having an input on that.
Thank you, Glyn. Got two other members of John. Councillor Ogle, have you?
I haven't put hand up, Chairman, because you've covered what I was thinking of. The rural bus services are important. There's some changes due. I think there's a review coming through anyway, so it'd be good to look at that. The highways review continuation, and all the lists that you said, they're all relevant. So that's why I put my interest, Chairman, but I'll go along with the main thoughts.
Councillor Perdue-Haran, it's your time to... No. No. Okay. Councillor Owen, you're a substitute today, but you do have can have an input. So if there's anything there,
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything else since this hopefully is only going to be my one and only time in this committee. But who knows? I might offend the business manager again and be required to sit in with you. But I think there are two amongst the ones. The transition between children's and adult social care, I think, is critical, and you know as well as I know that has been an ongoing issue, shall we say, for some time now, and I think that is one that ought to be a high priority. And I'd also particularly like to see, if you're talking about a highways review going forward, the relationship between VIA as a trading arm company and the county council, because I don't know, I don't always feel that they're singing from the same hymn sheet. And I think it would be very useful to see if we could not improve the efficiency and communication between the two arms, so that we all know where we're going with that. So those would be the priorities I would hope that you would look at the moment.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And obviously you're always welcome.
Yeah, that's what worries me.
Okay. What we'll do now is we'll take those away and prioritise them, evidence them, look at how we can populate the work programme going forward with these various items.
I mean, it's quite a magical moment, and I agree heavily with what Councillor Owen said, so I thought I'd pick up on it. But he's dead right about what he says about Veolia. I certainly feel that they don't pull in the same way, exactly the way Councillor Owen said it.
You never
So-
mentioned
so
Veolia. Yeah.
So you don't mention Veolia? Oh,
No.
sorry if you mentioned Veolia as well, but Via, true. But no, I wanted to mention about Veolia as well, in what I mentioned as well about the waste recycling centres. It's bigger than that in the fact that, for example, every waste collection authority in the county was called in. So all of our service managers from the districts and boroughs, I mean, for example, our team were in there for 3 days with their team. All the Broxtows were, Rushcliffes, etc. The outcome of that review was that they've now decided to recycle bottle tops as well. That was the sole and one and only outcome of the whole thing. And you kind of feel like, was it a tick box exercise? So hopefully, from our point, bearing in mind it's one of the biggest contracts we give out as a county council, and probably the thing that affects, one of the few things that affects all residents as well with regards to waste collection. It'd be something to look at as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So going back to what I was saying, what was the phrase? Shuttle run between the three select committees and the overview, and we'll see where those issues do sit, and then we'll get back to everyone. We need to prioritise them, evidence and witness. So see how we can look into these to make it better for our residents, because ultimately that's what we're going to be doing, isn't it? That's what we're here for. So, yeah, you can touch on how we're going to do it.
Well, members, you've managed to remarkably differentiate and delineate between things that would be in your individual select committees or things that were overview. So you made the shuttle running, I think, a little easier in some respects, because there were one or two that leapt out as being really cross-cutting and overview, whereas quite a lot of them were fairly well bounded within your individual committees. The things that immediately leap out that I think we'll go away and do some work on that felt very cross-cutting, naturally transitions, looks at both adults and children's. We had I think something like shareholder reporting on all of our companies. So I was taking the example about ARC and VIA, but you might equally ask that question about some of the other companies or the other external category A bodies that we're a part of. Councillor Full mentioned Freeport, for example. Cost of living, something that's obviously very contemporary as an issue of today, but impacts in kind of a lot of areas across the organisation. Devolution, again, something that will impact on a number of different portfolios across the organisation. And then the other one that leapt out as being, again, truly cross-cutting was around the Nottinghamshire plan, both in terms of vital signs reporting, but also just general performance. Those, as well as the obvious things that sit very squarely in your terms of reference, like the budget, of which you saw on the timetable. You've got 2 meetings dedicated to budget, are already starting to sound like some really big topics of interest. But as the chairman says, we'll need to do a bit of work now to scope those things up, try and get to some kind of questions or key points of scope and definition for those sorts of things. And then we'll repeat this exercise with the select committees to see what else turns up, and we'll try and turn you round a proposed work programme during the summer.
Thank you.
Just one question first, because our lead people are kind of they're kind of thinking through this, and they've got lots of suggestions that I haven't made today because I've assumed they'll go to their select committee. That is right. That stuff will get to. So we don't tell them what to do, and that's it.
There will be select committee meetings as well where we can
so they'll be able to
populate their work programmes out, and we.
Great.
use
That's
that
good. I
shot
thought that
and
was the
run.
case. I just thought I'd better check because as I say, I've got, otherwise I've got a very long list, and I thought I'd better not do that.
No. Okay.
The other thing I was going to say to you as well is, you know, particularly, say for example, you take a devolution as an example. That's something that certainly I would like to get really involved in kind of locally, just to see what local people are thinking and feeling. So how will you make sure that you involve members appropriately? And, you know, I've got all these functions down: reports, interviews, private meetings, focus groups, site visits, blah, 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 all those things. How will you make sure that then that we can get involved in those activities in our division to help the scrutiny process locally in our divisions?
Well, we can, as a committee, we can visit different places. We've got to evidence it as a whole committee, so we can do it all together. Yeah, well, we can in a car.
So I'm very conscious that I'm now in the presence of scrutiny experts, so I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. In my mind, the way I would see that working is, once you've got a work programme, you might identify a topic that warrants a review, something that is more than just you receiving a report in a meeting, having a debate and drawing some recommendations. A review would be something you go out and investigate over a period of 2 or 3 weeks. Let's work on the scenario you described about devolution. If you were to describe a scope for that review around devolution, you might schedule in some public consultation or public engagement events, and you'd be able to go out and do that work. It will be in the planning of those things that I think will define that kind of task. But again, as you heard this morning, there's a whole variety of ways that you can engage or scrutinise the work, both pre and post decision. And as we get into that work programming, you can colour in some of that detail.
Can I make a comment, Joe? So what I was thinking when people were talking about some things which were really big areas of work was what I was thinking when you were talking. So there'd be quite a detailed piece of work I would envisage to kind of describe what the focus and the scope of that piece of work is. And ergo, then how are you going to do it? What's the best way to do it? What are the outcomes you're looking for? How will you know? What does good look like? That sort of stuff. So we've had a very high level discussion, devolution, a word. Yeah, so but there's quite a bit of work to do there to say, you know, what are we trying to achieve with that? What particular aspect, what angle, where are we trying to get to? What is that scope of any work? So I think that's something that we need to do, and then have dialogue with members about what does that look like. And because we might do a piece of work and you might say, oh no, that's not the bit I meant. I meant something else. So I think, as Adrian says, there's quite a lot of planning and detailed work to do on the back of this. It's a great list, and it's great that everybody's been thinking about it and got some really good ideas, but we need to do a bit more work and think about what that looks like, because otherwise I think we might be less successful than we might be otherwise. And, you know, and what is the value it's going to add by doing that piece of work? You know, and that would, to me, would speak to resources and time scales for work, because the stage you might want to do something might vary. So I think that's all dialogue to have.
Just come back briefly, it's okay, Chair. Just to say, so when you're designing what the kind of the process by which, and you'll involve opposition members as well. Yeah, okay, that's good.
Just as people were talking, I think one of the big things about all of this is about the public consultation part. And, you know, I know in past when we've sort of gone out to public consultation, when we've been in our groups, one side, oh, we've done better than you on consultation, and we did it this way, and you've done better. But I think, in my own opinion, I don't think we've ever bottomed it. I think it's always been one of the most difficult issues to get to grip with. And I think that, for me, while we're sort of going through that process, I would like an overview of our public consultation, of how we're doing it, what we're doing, because we, you know, over the years we've tried a number of different things. I mean, we used to, I can't remember if it was the County 1000 or something like that, where we'd contacted or emailed 1,000 people that we'd email them and they'd send us their views. And I just, you know, from my own, I don't know whether that's still ongoing. So it just, you know, if we're going to go through the processes, I think one of the things that we ought to bottom is about how we are going to use public consultation as well. Not, you know, for all what we do and how we get that information back in. I understand the bit around being able to invite people to come in, or members of the public who can come and speak at scrutiny if they contact us and, you know, and say to us, oh, we want to speak. I understand that. But I think it's about the other people, the ones that we always say, you know, they're hard to reach. I don't think they call them hard to reach these days, but, you know, those that we find more difficult or sometimes don't have a voice. Because I and we all go to a lot of meetings where it's either fellow councillors, or including myself, who have a lot to say, or the normal local resident who is always there and always has a lot to say. And what we don't get is actually some of the other people who have got real concerns but just don't know how to articulate it and come to us. And I'm just wondering how we get round that. You know, because there's a lot of people out there that we're not actually getting in, you know, totally in touch with. So one of the things probably encompassing all is how do we go, you know, how do we go about the public consultation as well?
I think it's a good question, and I think the last 2 years have shown us a lot. During COVID times, we've had to go out there, haven't we, and engage with our public, and there's a lot more heightened sense with people out there. Those hard to reach people, they had a voice during COVID because they needed help. So it's ongoing, isn't it? We're going to look at it, we'll review it, and that's how we can all feed in as local members. So we'll all know our areas better than anyone else. So, and there's those little organisations that we've all had a part in. So we can feed into those. Okay. Well, with nothing else to say, and we've got some good ideas here, we'll get back to everyone. The meeting, declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much. And thank you, Adrian.